we've just spent several hours hearing in excruciating, painful detail the allegations that Dr. Blasey Ford has levied against him, and she's come across as extraordinarily credible. So for him to sit there and to say, none of this happened, she's absolutely lying, is not going to come across very well. Right. In addition to that, the many details that we've heard from other accusations, which may or may not be true, we have to set that out there, but other allegations that have been levied against him, the narrative that we've heard and anecdotes from stories that his friend Mark Judge have written, they all kind of point to this image of a party boy, which runs really counter to everything he said. He absolutely needs to come across as somebody who is speaking the truth and credible while he's doing it.
So Leslie and Caitlin, I'd like you guys to both weigh on this as well, because at this point, how much can he backtrack to seem credible? I mean, he said, I never blacked out from drinking. We have now, college classmates who come out and said, well, I don't know if he's blacked out, but he drank a lot. We have people who seem to paint a different portrait of him, at least when he was partying, right? Not necessarily the Brett Kavanaugh that showed up to class and got straight A's, but the Brett Kavanaugh that perhaps when he was out with his friends. So it's a slightly different Brett Kavanaugh that we've heard him describe. So at this point, what do we need him to say that will make us believe him, Leslie?
It's going to be very difficult for him to go back and change history and change his story. So what the narrative that comes out is that he was a bad drunk, that he was somebody who was crude, he perhaps engaged in this kind of activity, but there is some activity to point to. And then there's the other side when he was working as a colleague, and he has other character references that go back to when he was in middle school and high school. Those are great, but it's this issue of alcohol and what his behavior was like at that time, which unfortunately I think we're going to dive deeper into later this afternoon. That's really the question, because if he had said, I had done some things I'm not proud of, alcohol was involved in those things, but I've never done anything to the extent of that.
Exactly.
There would be, and people would give him the benefit of the doubt. He's repented, and there are many people who have done things as young teenagers or as young adults and changed their character, changed their behavior, and become really kind of leaders in our country.
And I think Americans are sympathetic towards people who are repentant and change their character.
Right, which raises the question of why Kavanaugh set such a high bar for himself to meet from the very beginning. First of all, by denying he was even at this party, and then going further in that Fox News interview to kind of paint himself as someone who wasn't participating in this kind of thing.
I'm so glad you brought up that Fox News interview, because we have some sound from that. We're gonna play it right now.
Were there times when perhaps you drank so much, was there ever a time that you drank so much that you couldn't remember what happened the night before?
No, that never happened.
You never said to anyone, I don't remember anything about last night?
No, that did not happen.
Now, of course, he was not under oath there. That was a media interview, so it's different from what he will face on Capitol Hill. But do we all believe that at this point?
Well, what he is also going to say in his testimony today, according to the prepared remarks that were released by the Judiciary Committee yesterday, he's going to say that, yeah, I drank some beers on the weekends. I'm paraphrasing here, but and I've done there have been things that I've done that I cringe about, but I did not do this. And he also goes on to say in that prepared testimony that while Ford may have experienced the traumatic event of a sexual assault, it wasn't by him. So he's trying to kind of thread the needle here by saying, I'm not being unsympathetic to her and to what she went through. I'm just saying that that wasn't me.
Yes, but there are at least a few senators who have said, whether or not Brett Kavanaugh committed this sexual assault, I don't know. But whether he's being totally truthful with us is really what I'm worried about.
And that is the situation he created for himself by setting what Caitlin's talking about as the bar so high that it's just not believable, especially, that's before we knew how credible Dr. Ford was going to be and how sympathetic a character, because she's certainly somebody you can see does not have a political motive to do it, and he has every political motive to react the way he does.
So how can he fix this, do you think, in his testimony? He sort of boxed himself in a certain manner at this point. What do we need to see? What does he need to say that will clear this up?
Well, the people that he needs to convince aren't necessarily on the Judiciary Committee. They're members like Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Jeff Flake, of course, is on that committee, and interestingly enough, he did cede his question to the special prosecutor in that instance. There are a couple of swing votes here in terms of what he could get in the Senate. We also have to consider, too, that while the public is watching, one key figure of that public is watching, which is the President of the United States, who has the power to, demand that Kavanaugh get a vote or to withdraw him, depending on how he feels this testimony has been going, how he feels about Ford, how he feels about Kavanaugh and responding to Ford. It still remains a big question mark. Of course, hovering over that decision, too, is that he has also been accused of sexual assault, and he elaborated on that yesterday in a press conference, saying that is informing his position in terms of defending Kavanaugh.
It's a very good point. We do have to go back to that question of certainty, and Dr. Ford said she is 100% certain, not 99.9%, but 100% certain that Brett Kavanaugh is the man who assaulted her, or the boy rather. Do we need to hear Brett Kavanaugh say he is 100% certain he did not do it?
Let's just say he does that. Let's say he does that. She still is coming across in such a compelling way, because she's explaining her trauma, she's explaining the laughter, she's explaining these very specific details that, as she says, seared her memory. And I don't think the interesting part, and Linda talks about it a little bit in terms of like how we're losing Republican women and independent women. So we got a lot of women who experienced something very similar to that, and it echoes that one or two memory points. So she's speaking at a different frequency that is going to be very difficult for him to counter.
Let's toss for a moment to the time during the testimony when Dr. Porter talked about her strongest memory of the assault. Let's listen.
What is the strongest memory you have? The strongest memory of the incident, something that you cannot forget. Take whatever time you need.
Indelible in the hippocampus is the laughter, the uproarious laughter between the two, and they're having fun at my expense.
You've never forgotten that laughter. You've never forgotten them laughing at you.
They were laughing with each other.
And you were the object of the laughter?
I was, underneath one of them while the two laughed. Two friends having a really good time with one another.
I mean, those words are like a gut punch, and she's delivering them with, there's so much pain present. To me, it goes to the question of character, right? How can anyone derive pleasure at terrifying a young, innocent girl, right? Even if you are a young man who's maybe had a few too many beers, you would still think that at a certain point, your character would kick in.
Yeah, that's going to be the interesting question, because it's like two sides of the same man, right? We have this incredible long history of a very strong, solid jurist. And then you have this other side, this kind of darker side, when alcohol seems to be involved, and the youth being involved. Maybe he shook all of that. Maybe he moved away from that. But he doesn't ever admit it. He doesn't acknowledge it in a way that seems palatable, that people can accept. And that's going to be the hardest part. And I don't know that he's going to have that kind of coming to truthfulness with the committee, especially because it would require him to go back against some of his previous statements.
Right. But that's a type of humility that we would almost like to see from someone that has committed something egregious in their past. I read a very interesting account of a woman who did have a similar experience in high school, and later her assailant found her and tearfully apologized. And she said, you know what, I forgave him, but he apologized. And I think what is so searing for so many women who've gone through something like this is the seeming lack of self-questioning as to why would these women ever even accuse me of this? There's no questioning. Yes, maybe he says I did not do this, but would he stop and say, why are they accusing me of this? Let me think about that for a moment, right? And have some sort of self-reckoning of some type of behavior in his past that might have lent this, something like this to happen.
Right.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point in terms of the challenges that he will have in addressing that kind of question if it comes up, because he says from the very beginning that he had no knowledge of this, that he wasn't there, and that it wasn't him.
Right.
So again, going to that bar that he set, it is very difficult for him to deviate in any way from that. And so he's going to try to do it by proxy, right? To say that I didn't do this, but I don't doubt that this happened to her.
Right.
And I think also by talking about, you know, the laughter element and what she went through, remember, she was a 15-year-old girl. That is, of course, a very formative age, a coming of age, and a very sensitive time, especially for a 15-year-old girl.
Right.
We are talking about, you know, that this was 35 years ago. We also have to talk about what she says have been lasting effects from that. She's talked about PTSD, she's talked about her anxiety, panic attacks, claustrophobia, things that have stuck with her over those 35 years. So it's no longer just that, oh, this happened 35 years ago. It's remarkable that over 35 years she has been feeling the effects.
The manifestations, right? Whether they're panic attacks on an airplane, and people are criticizing on Twitter, well, she got on a plane to go on vacation. It doesn't mean she cannot get on a plane. It means that anxiety continues. It's the anxiety to put a second front door. It's the anxiety to have difficulty in relationships. And so I think collectively we'll agree something did happen. But how clear she is about who assaulted her is going to be the bigger challenge, right? And how are we going to reconcile those two? And even if the judge does come across as very sympathetic, we're always going to really wonder about this. And I think that's the challenge. And I think we're about to go through some really ugly details in the next few hours that nobody, nobody wants to.
I agree. Let's listen to Dr. Ford talk about how this event has affected her life.
Brett's assault on me drastically altered my life. For a very long time, I was too afraid and ashamed to tell anyone these details. I did not want to tell my parents that I, at age 15, was in a house without any parents present, drinking beer with boys. I convinced myself that because Brett did not rape me, I should just move on and just pretend that it didn't happen. Over the years, I told very, very few friends that I had this traumatic experience.
Linda, I want to bring you in now because we just heard Dr. Ford talk about how this experience that happened when she was 15 went on to affect, you know, the rest of her life. Dr. Ford and others who come forward with stories or accusations of sexual assault that happened long ago often face criticism. Some people say, you know, well, that happened a long time ago. Why ruin a man's life now? And I think when you hear how her life has already, I mean, not been ruined, she's obviously a very successful woman, but she's carried so much of the pain from that attack through the rest of her life, it colors those accusations that come from people saying, well, why are you trying to ruin someone's life at this point? Would you agree, Linda?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Dr. Blasey Ford gets at the core of what so many victims of assault deal with, which is she said she was afraid and ashamed. Because when something like this happens to you, you feel some sense of guilt, you wonder what role you may have played in bringing it about, and feel like you're not somehow innocent of it, no matter what the circumstances are, and I think that that's part of what she was describing. I also think it's pretty clear in her detailing of the chronology of how she brought her story forward that she was grappling with whether or not it made sense at this juncture, after all these years, to share this story with anyone, much less with the world. So I think that she is still clearly dealing with the impact of that, regardless of how successful she's been in her life, and that this is something that a lot of women and men who've been assaulted can really relate to. Also, to the earlier point about what Brett Kavanaugh can say or do at this point, when you juxtapose anything that he might say in the next couple of hours with Dr. Blasey Ford talking about the indelible memory of his laughter, I think there's very little that he can do that is going to sway public opinion in a way that makes a difference. But the real question comes down to whether or not he can reach the handful of individuals who are probably still swayable at this point, who are going to ultimately vote on whether or not to move forward with this confirmation.
Right. Well, let's talk about that question of memory for a moment, because Dr. Ford discussed it, and she said, you know, when you're the victim of an assault like that, as we were talking about earlier, there are certain things that just remain in your mind crystal clear. Now, if you talk about